Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, July 24th. Congressman Seth Moulton is here this morning. Let's go on the record. A Marine, a former presidential candidate, a candidate for re-election. Where this Massachusetts maverick is putting his priorities as he navigates a divided America. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Jennifer Woods. Great to have you with us this morning. We're pleased to have Congressman Seth Moulton sitting at the table this morning. A Democrat, he has represented the state's 6th congressional district since 2015. A Marine, a veteran of the war in Iraq. Serves on the House Armed Services Committee, a native of the North Shore, grew up in Marblehead, holds a bachelor's degree from Harvard in physics and a master's degrees at both, in fact, master's degrees in business and public policy, also from Harvard. Congressman, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for your time.
Good to be back.
Great to see you.
Thanks for being here on this very, very hot day.
The whole weekend, right?
Which leads us to our first question, which is about climate change. President Biden came to Massachusetts to talk about climate this past week, but he did not declare a climate emergency. Were you disappointed?
Look, Biden is not the problem here. All right. So when the critics are attacking Biden for what he's doing or not doing, they're completely losing sight of the fact that it's Republicans in Congress and Joe Manchin, I would add, who are preventing us from moving forward on this issue. So there's some pluses and minuses to actually declaring a climate emergency. That's really not the point. The point is we got to stop debating this and actually taking action. You know, what I want to see is some real long-term investment that will make sense. And one of the most exciting visits I have had recently in Massachusetts is to the new fusion project out at Fort Devens, where they are making transformative investments in technology that could fundamentally change the world. And guess what? If we make that here in America, even better here in Massachusetts, we'll not only save the planet, we'll export that to the rest of the globe, and it'll mean a lot of jobs for people right here at home. You're
a big supporter of nuclear power, but I think there are a lot of progressive Democrats in your party that would not follow you on that trail. Is that fair to say? And how successful have you been in trying to introduce that part of the conversation into this climate change debate?
Yeah, no, we're actually making a lot of progress. I mean, you look at Europe right now, France is looking pretty good as Russia shuts off gas. Germany's in a world of hurt because they shut down all their nuclear power. And now they're actually starting up coal plants, which of course are far worse for the environment, far worse for climate change, and actually just far worse for, in terms of danger to people's health. But what we're really talking about here is an investment in the future, right? Fusion has none of the risks that come with fission power, and fourth, fifth generation fission, which is being developed at MIT and other places and built around the globe, that doesn't have the risks of the power plants that were popular in the 50s and 60s. So we're really talking about moving forward, and it's important for everyone in this debate to listen to science. We love to criticize Republicans for not listening to science, and there are tons of examples. Democrats need to listen to science on nuclear power as well.
I have to note that you were not with the president in Somerset this past week when he was there, considing what happened.
And that means I can be with you.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting in the same room with us, probably.
I want to talk about 988. Your hotline has been up and running for, what, about a week now?
That's right.
Time-wise?
That's exactly a week and a day.
So what have you learned so far, and how much promise does this mental health hotline show so far?
The early data is unbelievably encouraging. A lot of people calling, a lot of people getting help, calls not being dropped. But here's the bottom line. Over 45,000 Americans die every year by suicide. Every one of them alone, almost all of them because they just don't know where to turn for help in that desperate moment. 988 is going to fundamentally change that because everyone will remember it. You know, you don't have to Google the local fire department if you wake up and there's a fire, you know, you dial 911. But the other thing that is starting to change, and evidenced by our conversation this morning, is that more people are talking about mental health and steadily chipping away at that stigma. Because the problem today is that a lot of people don't know who to call, but even some people who do know whom to call, they don't want to. They're embarrassed. They're afraid. They felt like I did when I first came to terms with having post-traumatic stress, and frankly, really wanted to keep that hidden because I thought it might hurt me.
You just mentioned at the very beginning of your thought about that there's a volume of call, therefore it might create some time lapse. So you're confident that as time goes out, that's going to smooth out, and the process will get much smoother and easier and more immediate?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously our hope is that more people will call. About half the Americans who deal with a mental health crisis every year never get any help at all. So we want more people to call. The federal government has invested 18 times more money this year than last year to plus up these call centers, to build the national network, to make sure it's all interconnected. So you call someone, you put a call into that hotline in Massachusetts, it will probably go to a local call center. You know, you'll be directed to someone who can meet your needs. Like if I call and explain I'm a veteran, I'll get to talk to someone who specializes in veterans' mental health. But if that person is busy, the call has to get relayed to another person or another call center that has an opening. That's why it took a while to actually get this network stood up. I mean, it was 2 years ago that I actually passed the bill, but it seems to be working really well so far. Long term, though, there's no question we need to invest a lot more in mental health care in America.
And hire more people to be able to take a lot of these calls, or at least put them into the system.
That's right. So the critical point is just getting through that moment of crisis. There's amazing data that I think 9 out of 10 Americans who attempt suicide but don't succeed never try again. They regret it. So getting through that crisis is key. But you also need long-term therapy. And anyone who's tried to get a therapist appointment knows that there are not enough mental health clinicians. That's another thing we have to change long-term.
Let's talk about what's going on in Congress. The House is pushing forward on gay marriage and abortion rights with all the latest rulings from the Supreme Court. But how optimistic are you that this is the end of the political road for the foreseeable future, or not optimistic, I should say?
Look, I'm not very optimistic. I mean, there's an awful lot of good stuff that we've passed through the House that's just gone to die in the United States Senate. I've been an advocate for getting rid of the filibuster for years. You know, for people following the politics of this and the political policy, I think we need to get rid of the filibuster. I don't think the Founding Fathers even intended for us to have it. But back to the point on these issues of fundamental freedoms, fundamental civil rights in America. The one bright spot, I would say, is at least the glass half full view, is that I think 47 Republicans in the House voted for that marriage equality bill. That's about 4 times as many as I expected. Now, of course, let's be honest, it's still a minority of the party. That's right. It's still a minority of the party. I mean, the vast majority of the Republican Party is fully supportive of taking rights away from Americans.
The key is the number of Republicans that you can get in the Senate, though, right?
But that's the key. And the fact that there were 4 dozen Republicans in the House gives me a little bit more hope that we might get enough in the Senate. But if you ask me to be terribly optimistic,
not so much.
I wanted to move on to the next topic, money in the midterms and where we sit right now, because this is the next to the last weekend in July, so we're heading into August and we're heading into the election season. You've been raising money for other Democrats, right? You have $1.5 million in the bank, so doing well. But are you facing a near impossible task, considering what? Inflation, the president's 30% approval rating, 80% of Americans believing the U.S. is headed in the wrong direction. Are you facing a near impossible task?
No, there's time to turn it around. I mean, politics changes so quickly these days. But let's be honest, Americans are very upset at inflation, and they should be. I mean, it's hard to afford a bottle of milk for a lot of people right now, right? So there's a lot of work that we clearly have to do, and Democrats have to be willing to show that we're willing to change. Now, put this in perspective. We have a Republican Party that's more interested in banning books, boycotting Disney, and taking away fundamental freedoms from every woman in America, right? So putting this in perspective, Democrats have a good case to make. But I think, to your point about the numbers, we have to be willing to show that we're going to change.
Well, give me 1 or 2 examples of how Democrats have to change.
So in the House, we've got the new Democratic coalition that I'm a part of that has a really concrete plan to address inflation. It's been getting a lot of support. We should bring that to a vote. I think the president needs to level with the American people and say he's going to make some changes because his approval rating is low. Let's hear some new things. Maybe he needs to change some people out to show that he's going to take a different approach to the issues. But those things need to happen between now and November for us to really win the election.
So you're saying, in other words, the progressives in the party are holding back change or being able to push the agenda forward?
I mean, I didn't say that specifically, but I do know that there are people in the White House who are concerned about that. I don't know exactly what the right answer is. I'm not the president, but clearly what he's doing isn't enough. So he's got to be willing to show that he can change. That's part of leadership, right? Coming to terms with a problem and showing a path forward, a way to fix it.
Seth Moulton is with us. We're on the record. Stay with us.